So hello to everybody, good afternoon, and hello to this very important, very exciting, surely very exciting session on fiscal policy in Germany in the context of this Fiscal Matters Week, and just at the end and the midst of some very, very important political developments in Germany, as everyone knows probably. When we started to discuss how to and if we want to do this session, we were not quite sure if that will be the good moment, because we knew that the election would take place on Sunday, and some days after the election it would maybe difficult, we thought, and we had some doubts to discuss on the future of German fiscal policy. Now, I think we're in the midst of a situation where it feels like we are exactly at the right moment to discuss this, because we're in the midst of preparing for the new government, and irrespectively of who will govern in the end, and there are two options probably at the moment, the big issues are on the table, and they are very important for Germany. They are very important for Europe, which is how to handle the big challenges, how to finance climate investment, infrastructure investment, and how to handle all this in the current context, in the fiscal rules context in Germany, the debt break and the European rules. What does that mean for the coalition talks? What may be the outcome of these coalition talks, and what will change if there will be the one or the other option, which may, for the moment, it seems as if it's either a conservative liberal green coalition or social democratic liberal green coalition or green liberal coalition. And that may make quite a difference, especially because there are some candidates for the Ministry of Finance which may not look like the most progressives, to put it mildly, but maybe we can come back to this personal question also in the run-up of in the course of this discussion. I would like to hand over to my colleague from the Forum New Economy, Julia, to present the panelists, and then we will start the discussion with inputs from each of you.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and welcome everyone. Welcome to all our guests today. I'd like to start by introducing Janek Steitz, from his project manager at Agora Energiewende. Focuses mainly on fundamental issues around the energy transition, and actually not long ago, or well, in the beginning of September, Janek published a paper commissioned by Agora and Forum, where together with Tom Krebs, they sought to calculate a bit the public investment needs for climate protection until 2030. So this is what Janek will start off with, and this will serve, let's say, a bit of as a teaser for the discussion to follow, and to show a bit what expects the next German governments in terms of public spending, which, as we'll see, is alone in the climate area is quite impressive. Then we have Nicola Brandt, head of the OECD Berlin office. Nicola is economist and has long-standing also experience in government advising. Among others, also on financial matters, tax and social policy, labor markets, and so on and so forth. And Nicola will bring a bit in the OECD perspective in the discussion. Then we have Philippa Sigl-Glöckner, SPD politician, but also above all director and founder of the Berlin-based think tank Dezernat, Zukunft. Philippa's core topics, let's say, are reform of the German fiscal policy, but also public finance. And she'll bring in her ideas on how to find a space or leeway for reform within the current framework of the debt break. Then we have a Guntram Wolff, director of Bruegel, well-known economist who has long contributed to European political economy and governance, fiscal, monetary, and financial policy, among other things. He regularly testifies in the meetings of the European finance ministers, the European Parliament, the German Parliament, the French Parliament, and so on and so forth. So he'll surely be able to bring in a bit the European perspective onto this. And last but not least, we have Shahin Vallée, head of the Geo-Economics program at the German Council of Foreign Relations, and also formerly economic advisor to Emmanuel Macron at the French Ministry for Economy and Finance. So as I said, I'll start, I would like to give the word to begin with to Janek. Janek, please.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to fill in for Tom Krebs, who was originally planned to participate. So Tom and I looked at public investment needs to meeting the new German 2030 climate target. And yeah, let me tell you what we found and what that means for fiscal policy. So first of all, we find that over the 10-year horizon, 2021 to 2030, public financing needs for climate investments add up to around 460 billion euro or 46 billion euro a year. And the majority of that is additional to what has been made available through recent climate and recovery instruments. The 46 billion per year translate to around 1.3% of 2019 GDP. And that is at the upper bound of what other studies find that assume a certain ratio of 20 to 30% of public to total climate investments. And one reason for that is that we define climate investments more broadly and also include positions like investments in human resources or climate neutral social housing that we believe are important to make the transition work. And another contribution of the study is that we differentiate between three components of public investments: federal investments, municipal investments, and public funding for private investments. And what we find is that federal investments only make up around 20% of total public investments, and municipal investments make up 35%. And the largest part is public funding for private investments that make up around 45%. So what does that mean for fiscal policy? First of all, the analysis suggests that we need additional fiscal space. And some of that may come from CO2 pricing, some of that from abolishing climate harmful subsidies, but some will certainly have to come from additional debt if taxes are not increased or budgets consolidated. And if we talk about a green golden rule, the implication, I guess, is that we should have a discussion on what should be covered by such a rule and how to deal with public investments, grants in particular. So when we look at the party positions and the political majorities in Germany, it seems quite likely that the German debt brake, the Schuldenbremse, will continue to exist for the next couple of years. So two fiscal policy options gain a lot of attention now. The first is off-balance sheet financing through independent investment agencies. And the second is legislative modifications of the cyclical component when calculating the permitted deficit spending under the debt brake. I can and I will not say much about the latter, but I'm sure Philippa from Dezernat Zukunft will certainly talk about that. So let me talk a bit about off-balance sheet financing. When looking at the three components of climate investment needs, off-balance sheet financing seems a feasible solution for federal investment and for some of the municipal investments. So for example, the federal government can support the expansion of the federal rail infrastructure through equity injections for Deutsche. Or the government can set up a hydrogen infrastructure company that develops and finances a hydrogen infrastructure. Or the federal or municipal governments could either directly or through investment agencies acquire shares or provide debt to municipal public transport organizations or public housing development companies. The critical point is that this strategy has its limit if the conditions of what is considered a financial transaction under the German debt brake are not met. And that seems to be the case, in particular for public grants, for private investments, the third components, like in the case for building renovation, for example, for carbon contracts for industry, for difference in industry transformation. In these cases, there's not an asset or counter value on the public balance sheet, which makes it then hard to argue that these transactions, the federal net assets equal, which is required for it to be a financial transaction. So concluding, high public investment needs are needed to meet the 2030 climate goals. Off-balance sheet financing can be part of the solution, and it looks like it will be part of the solution, in particular to finance public infrastructure, but other reforms targeting to increase total permitted deficit spending, for example, by reforming the cyclical component, are needed in particular for public funding of private investments. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Janek. I would then hand over to Nicola.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to discuss this important issue here. So what the fiscal policy needs are for a new government and at the current juncture. And I'm going to present a little bit the OECD recommendations, views that we've laid out in the economic survey Germany and our outlook. But perhaps let me step back and take an even broader general picture, or shed a light on it than Janek did, to think about where we are, right? Because that will determine what is needed in terms of fiscal policy and what are the challenges at the moment. And I would say one is certainly overcoming the COVID crisis and its legacy. And I think there's a fiscal legacy, of course, debt has increased a little bit, but there's also an education debt. School closures have been particularly prolonged in Germany, in particular in 2021, and social services here estimate that the dropouts may double to 200,000 each year. And of course, that has implications also for growth, for the ability to meet challenges like getting to a climate neutral economy. So that's certainly something that we have to keep in mind. There's also a health debt that comes from the crisis beyond COVID, as symptoms of depressions have tripled in girls. There's an increase in obesity, etc. And all these things will add to pressures in health spending and pension spendings that are age-related. So that's also something we need to keep in mind when we think about spending needs. Then there are the spending needs that Janek laid out, and they're already impressive, right? And I would add, it's not only it's a twin transition, right? It's a green transition towards climate neutrality, which requires considerable investment in innovation, in skills, but also in infrastructure. And then the digital transition also requires such investment. And the third challenge, equally important, is of course that vision is needed. So everybody is agreed we need to move to a climate neutral economy. But how do I actually get there? That's not trivial, right? And it doesn't involve only spending, so numbers, but how to do it. And then from this big pictures, I think three questions arise. One has already been laid out here. We're going to discuss it. The big discussion here is, are the fiscal rules perhaps too tight in order to meet those spending needs? And then an equally important issue, I think, for fiscal policy in Germany is, even if I have enough money, will I be able to spend it effectively to improve growth and debt, climate, and also fiscal sustainability? Because that has been an issue in the past, right? With big funds provided by the federal government, and then difficulty to actually use this money at the local level. So that's something to think about. And so the question is, what can be done? So what we are recommending, have been recommending, obviously, is in the short term, don't consolidate too fast. Be sure to support the recovery until it's well on its way. And I think there's definitely enough flexibility in the fiscal rules to do that. What we've also been recommending is, and it links a little bit to it could link to the off-balance sheet discussion that Janek mentioned. So we've recommended to devise a 10 to 20 year investment plan, and perhaps tasking an independent institution with doing that and also doing the assessment. So what kind of investments are needed? And why is that a good idea? Well, for one, also to improve the quality of investment spending, make the right decisions, but also if there is such a plan, the problems in spending money in the past could be partly addressed, in the sense that one problem with investment spending has been that there was not enough capacity at the local administrative level, but also at in the construction sector. So, but for example, if construction countries know that there are big investment plans that are going to be implemented, they do have incentives to raise their capacities. And then, so when we've done that, then of course a third element will be to think about, the new government would think about, what does sensible financing look like? Do I increase taxes? Do I use some debt? Is it going to be public versus private spending? And I think from there, from this assessment, you can derive whether or not you need to change fiscal rules, whether there is a need for adjustment. But I think a final and equally important step is also think through why it has been so difficult for different actors, in particular at the municipal level, where a lot of this investment needs to take place, to actually do this kind of investment. And some of them, of course, have debt legacy, and something more needs to be done to help them. There have been steps, but more are probably needed. But a different issue also is the kind of qualified personnel available in the administration to run big investment projects, and how do I organize them? Do I pool this capacity? So there are many ideas on the table, but I think I just want to leave you with this question, because I think it's also important when thinking about meeting fiscal policy challenges at the current juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I hand over to Philippa, who has worked on these issues on regulation, how to make rules a little bit more flexible. But maybe you can start by giving us also a short view on the current situation of deficits in Germany and how to handle them. And maybe we can come back to that question just quickly. A state of things on when does Germany want to come back, or will Germany come back, depending on the government, to the debt break. That's been an exception now due to Corona.
Sure. And thank you for having me. It's a very interesting time to have this debate. Maybe I should just briefly say at the beginning, I'm not speaking as a SPD politician here, but as head of Dezernat Zukunft, so this may or may not be an SPD position. Yeah, let's maybe start with the status quo where we are right now, because it's kind of an odd situation to start coalition negotiations from a finance point of view, because normally what you have is you have debt break, and then you can calculate what your fiscal space for the coming 4 years is, and then the pie kind of gets sliced up. or what's remaining of it, what isn't yet tied up by the existing budget. Well, this time round, we have the debt brake being suspended, or at least the deficit limit being suspended for this year and for next year. For this year, the government got permission to take on 240 billion of debt. And just to give you a sense of how much that is, the budget in normal times is around 360. So this is really a lot, even by standards of people like me who are not that scared of debt. It's really a huge amount. And then the preliminary budget for next year that was passed by government before the election had a deficit of 99 billion euros, which again is pretty large, and also only works because one's decided to suspend the debt brake for another year. I think it's already also been pretty clear that after that 2023 debt brake is going to be enforced again, or at least you can't have a COVID-based exemption again unless something bad with the virus happens, which we all don't hope for. So we have this slightly weird situation where in 2022 and 2023, we do have, in 2021, 2022, we kind of have unlimited fiscal space in a way because we don't have the deficit limit. And then in 2023 to 25, we have the sudden cliff where we have to get back on the debt brake and basically reduce deficits very, very fast. So how much fiscal space you will have in aggregate really kind of depends on what you do right now and whether you're able to also maybe carry some of that deficit forward, which you're not sure really supposed to do under the debt brake because it's an annual mechanism, right? That tells you every year you should run a deficit that's, if the economy is going badly, that there's a small deficit, an annual one, but you shouldn't do anything that spans across years, but has definitely been done in the past. And then for 23 to 25, you're under the debt brake and we need to see how to deal with the normal rules. So if you assume that we don't carry over any of the deficit from this year or next year, but only kind of do the game as usual, the remaining fiscal space that you can do things with is very small. At the moment, it's something like 10 billion. It always ends up being a little bit larger because of the technicalities of how the calculations are done. But I mean, given the numbers that Janek put forward and all the other things Nicola mentioned, this is basically nothing. But then if you look at the run rate, how much of the deficit space that's been given for this year has actually been used, we think that around 60 to 70 billion of permitted deficit from this year will actually not be used. And then the question is whether these spending permissions will just kind of be binned, or whether the government will try and carry them over so that they have 60 to 70 billion from this year, which they can then spend in the coming years. On the budget, I don't think that it will, the deficit because they now kind of have to redo the budget when the new government is in place. I don't really see why the deficit should be smaller than on the preliminary budget they set, because the economy is actually recovering slower than we thought. So I would assume this 900 billion deficit to remain. And then let's see whether that gets fully spent next year or whether you also have some remaining there. So I think actually a part of the spending needs that you've all mentioned can be met by carrying forward just these funds from past years, and maybe you need to do that with a special purpose vehicle, or maybe you can do it with the KfW or public bank, or maybe just with the normal budget. because you can always carry them forward, your deficit by 1 year. And I mean, with that, you would already get to 24 billion a year for 23 to 25. So you would have some spending leeway. I would also assume that's not enough, though. You have the green spending plans that you need to meet. If you have a Liberal Party in government, they probably also want some money for tax cuts or similar exercise that will definitely cost money. So then what you can do is within the debt break, without changing the constitution, you can change the mechanism how you do the calculation of how much you're allowed to spend, because the economy is running under potential. And this in Germany you can do without changing constitution, maybe even without changing simple law. We're not sure yet on that. Would probably be good actually to have at least a proper law, so that, because it is a change, that people know what's happening. But basically you change the calculation of how much your economy has. And if we enlarge that, because we say actually our labor market has a lot more space than we previously thought. After the COVID crisis, there's the question anyway, what is potential of our economy? Is that what it was before the crisis? Is it what it was during the crisis? Is some kind of weird average of those times? So you will have to think about this anyway. So you may as well think about this properly, and think about how much female employment can you have? Can you reduce part-time work? Can you work on the low-wage sector? And then you may get to a larger potential of what you thought was there before. And if you do that, you can probably get to something like another 25 billion a year. This is a ballpark figure, but then if you add that up with the fiscal space from carried over deficits, you can get about to 50 billion a year, which would be around what's required for climate spending. I do also think that SPVs, what Janek mentioned, or a KfW-based solution is a possibility. What I do think is unlikely is a golden rule. So a constitutional change that allows you to do deficit spending for net investment, for two reasons. First of all, because it requires a constitutional change and we won't have the majority, especially in the second chamber in Bundesrat. And also there are technical reasons which may imply that even if you do this, you will actually gain very, very small fiscal space. So I think it's more likely you go other pathways, but there definitely are ways to do this if everybody agrees that it should be done.
Thank you, Philippa. Very good to start with and have the numbers in mind. Maybe we can join both ideas of what you said and the public investment agencies, or whatever you call it, to see what this gives in total. I would like to bring in Guntram from Brussels, slightly outside view and European view. Please, Guntram, your input.
Thank you, Thomas. And I don't really consider this to be an outside view, but okay. I mean, just to give a few thoughts and additional thoughts, also from a European perspective on this. And fortunately, I don't have to deal with a debt break day by day. I have to deal with something that's even more complicated, which is called European fiscal rules. And it turns out that the European fiscal rules actually have quite a bit more leeway than the German debt break has itself. But let me give you the broad the broad pitch. The broad pitch at the European level is essentially that fiscal consolidation is part of life and is going to be unavoidable. And it's not driven by the fiscal rules primarily. It has to happen because deficits and debts are just very high, and in some countries they are really, really quite high. And the deficits are quite high, including the structural deficits. So this fiscal consolidation is going to happen over basically the next five years at least. What we know from, unfortunately, from history is that whenever there are fiscal consolidations, policymakers don't walk the talk. So meaning they talk about, sparing investment, ensuring that the future will be guaranteed, making sure that research and development investment goes up, etc., etc. They make big declarations on this, but in reality, they do the opposite. So they cut public investment, they cut future-oriented investments into research, they cut spending on young families, etc. I mean, this is well documented and was very well documented in the last consolidation period after the global financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis. This is what happened despite declarations at the highest political level to the opposite. And so here we are in a situation where we don't just need to preserve existing investments, we actually have to increase them. And the numbers, we heard already some numbers at the German level, at the European level, the numbers are quite a lot. So the European Commission estimates that total investment into energy and transport systems has to increase by 360 billion per year annually compared to the annual investment of the last decade. Now then a big question, and that's sort of the first big point, the big question then is how much of that has to be done by the public sector? And this is very controversially debated. What we looked at existing spending patterns. And it turns out that currently the transport and energy system, the investment is 28% on average across the EU done by the public sector. Now, an important part of the negotiations between, and we saw the USI, the selfie of the liberals and the green, an important part of the negotiations, I'm sure, will be about, what percentage of that investment is gonna, that we want to do to get the green things, the climate neutrality done, should be funded by the public sector, and what percentage should be done by the private sector. Now, my argument here is we have a current average pattern. We can probably tilt this somewhat, and we have instruments to do this, including carbon pricing and regulation, but there are limits to this. And there are limits to this coming from two factors. One factor is essentially the fact that there are some things the private sector will just not invest in because it's really a public good nature. And the second limitation factor, which is probably the more binding one, is politics. When I presented this paper on a green fiscal pact at the informal meeting of EU finance ministers, I can tell you there is a strong correlation between the fear of being confronted on the street by movements such as les gilets jaunes, so the yellow vests in France, or similar movements, so movements of citizens discontent with basically the economic implications and the cost of climate change to their own pockets. And your plea to go for higher public investment. So basically, the countries where the fear is biggest that people will go to the street or people will just desert or be annoyed by the social consequences, those countries tend to be the countries that want to have very high public investments. And I think it's probably also not a secret that those countries tend to be more in the south of Europe than in the north of Europe. So this is, I think, the picture on the European level. So we will have to use public money. This is unavoidable. If you take the 28%, it's basically 100 billion per year for the EU as a whole, which is quite a substantial amount of money. In a consolidation period, it's 0.7% of GDP. That compares to the 0.9% cut in public investment that we saw in the previous consolidation phase. So instead of going down 0.9, you have to go up 0.7. And this is a big challenge. Now, I do think there is a possibility to do this, and we can debate how precisely to do this. But essentially, I mean, you all talked about ways of doing this. It's basically trying to fund this increase in investment, at least temporarily, via deficits. Now, two concerns, and I think I'm speaking already too long, but two concerns that two issues that need to be discussed in this respect. I mean, one is, I think it makes imminent sense to fund investments into infrastructure, etc., that lasts over decades with deficits. This is basic accounting. I mean, you don't want to do it right away, funded by cutting other current spending. You can spread the cost over time, and that's what deficits are good for. And at current funding rates, I mean, that's what you should be doing. There's, however, one concern, and the one concern is that, unfortunately, the growth implications of green public investments might not be quite as positive as some of us are hoping. You know, the evidence is actually quite mixed on the growth effects of green investments, contrary to other public investment. For other public investment, we basically know that other public investment has pretty high positive multipliers. I mean, I've done my own econometric work on this, including in Germany. So you have very positive GDP effects, and you know, there's basically no issue in terms of, you know, being able to have significant public resources, public taxes in the future, because GDP just increases so much, and you know, that allows you to of course easily fund investments, current investments with deficits. With green investments, that's not so clear, because you replace a lot of existing brown infrastructure, which which we want to replace because of climate change, but which basically works, and we replace it. And the quicker we replace it, the bigger will be the cost of this without the positive growth effects. So this is a crucial debate. What is the growth effect of the climate transition? And I think the literature on this is in a very early stage, and it is not a super optimistic literature. Now, is that a problem for Germany, the growth effect? No, not at all. So I'm in the camp of those saying, you know, Germany has ample capacity to go out there and, you know, basically fund at negative rates this kind of future-oriented green investments. And, you know, then there are the constraints of the debt brake, and I'm happy to talk about those. But Philippa has already done a marvelous job explaining these constraints. But you know, basically, from an economic point of view, there's no reason why Germany shouldn't do it. Now, is that the same for countries that are fiscally more exposed? Let's say for Greece, just to focus minds. Well, I think for Greece there will be some pretty significant trade-offs. Those trade-offs and this cliff edge is not coming now, because now at the moment the EU Recovery Fund basically funds all the green investment you want in the south of Europe. I mean, this is huge amounts of transfers going to the south of Europe, but that money will dry up after 23, 24. So the cliff edge that Philippa explained for Germany for 22, coming from the hard introduction, 23, coming from the hard introduction of the debt brake. That cliff edge doesn't exist in the EU, and it's only coming, there's only a cliff edge coming from the end of Next Generation EU after essentially 23 or 24, depending on the country. So we will have to have a conversation what to do after 23, 24 in the fiscally fragile countries. For the rest, I think the German internal problem is I'm commenting here from the outside on that point, I think can be solved economically. Now, is there political will? I think that's part of the negotiation that has to happen now. It seems to me it's unavoidable that, this cliff edge in 23 needs to be avoided in Germany. It would be ridiculous to not avoid it and find ways of avoiding it. If you do that with a special purpose vehicle or something else, I don't have a strong preference for that. The reality is, once you have a rule that is too constraining, you know, you find basically ways of circumventing that, and so I think that's a very important domestic political debate and a very nasty political debate, I'm sure, but I think it's going to be unavoidable to face that reality of the cliff edge. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much. Yes, excellent contribution, like all up to now. And the next one, surely you also, Shahin. I won't say from the outside again, because you're also outside and not outside, because you're working at the DGAP in Berlin. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, you invited me to make provocative statements, so I will start with one. I'm struck by this conversation in the sense that there seems to be a broad consensus on the panel so far that the investment needs that we have because of the energy and climate transition are not compatible with the debt brake as it stands. And so to me, I have a very basic logic, is that, you know, if there are investment needs and they're not compatible with the debt rule, you know, either we change the debt brake or we abandon our energy and climate investments. And that to me seems to be the first starting point. And so I'm surprised that your reaction to this apparent contradiction is not to conclude that one of the two has to give. It is instead to try and find and dig holes inside the fiscal framework. So on one side, dig holes by creating off-balance sheet vehicles that are essentially providing the fiscal space that the rules are not giving themselves, or as Philippa has proposed, trying to create fiscal space by basically using calculation tricks that the rules allow so that we enhance and expand the fiscal space on that basis. And I have a lot of sympathy for these two approaches, but they posit that it's impossible to change the rules. And I don't know why we start from that starting point. And I don't know why in particular, because the experience of the last more than 10 years now, 12 years since the debt brake was introduced in 2009, is that actually when we were forced to, we did change the rules. After the 2015 crisis, migration crisis, when the federal government needed to allow more transfers to the municipalities, the rules were changed. They were changed under the argument that we were changing the responsibilities of the lenders and the federal government in the education system. But in practice, what that resulted in greater transfers from the federal government to the local level. In 2020, after the COVID crisis, the rules were changed again, once again to allow more transfers between the federal level and the lender level. So all of that to say that when push comes to shove, when there is a necessity, the German political system is fully able to change the constitution. It has done so more than 50 times since the constitution was established. And I don't see why, because of the climate crisis or because of another reason, I don't see why it would be impossible to do that again. So that's my starting point, just to let's open the possibility that the debt brake can be changed, because the German constitution, unlike the American constitution, is actually changed quite frequently. And so I don't see why we're creating an impossibility here when I don't see one. That being said, I'm opening and closing a bracket. The political circumstances for the constitutional amendments in 2009 and 2017 and 2020 are not wholly different than the political circumstances that we are in now. It's still a coalition that doesn't have a 2/3 majority, and it's still a coalition that therefore will need to have some votes from the opposition in order to change the constitution. This has happened in the past. It can happen again. It can happen again, provided there is an intellectual consensus around it, and provided this intellectual consensus allows to build a political consensus. So that's my first observation. My second observation is in response to what Guntram was saying. I think Guntram is fully right when he says the experience of consolidation over the last 10 years and longer, in fact, is that when we have to consolidate, the reality is we don't do it the right way. We don't preserve investment. We cut what is easier to cut. And what is easier to cut in general is public investment. And so knowing that, I think the pressure to amend the rules or the pressure to take that into account should be even greater. And it's not. And so I'll end with one word on what is it that we should focus on. To me, there are two almost distinct conversations, even though they're interrelated. The first one is on the reintroduction of the rules. Right now, the rules are suspended until 2023. The question is, do we reintroduce them in 2023? And if so, how? There are many ways to solve this question. We can decide to extend again the suspension. We can say, no, let's not reintroduce in 2023. This will create an abrupt fiscal cliff. Let's postpone that. That's one way. The other way is to reintroduce them in 2023, but with some changes. Maybe we won't have the time in the next year or so to allow and to agree on these changes. So maybe that's a more difficult case. A third option is to say, okay, let's apply the rules. Let's reintroduce the rules in 2023. Everybody is above the 3% or the 60% or other metrics. And so everybody can be put under EDP. So the Commission would be entirely founded to say, I'm putting everybody under EDP starting 2023. And by doing that, the Commission would be empowered to set the adjustment path for the next 5, 10, or how many years it decides. The beauty of the corrective arm of the pact is that, in fact, it gives more flexibility to the European Commission than the preventive arm of the pact, in which the adjustment has to be of 0.5% of structural deficit per year. So the Commission could very well say, actually, tomorrow, we will reintroduce the rules in 2023, and every member state will have to adjust by 0.1% per year for the next 5 years. And that will give us 5 years to have another conversation, which is separate, but which I think is equally important, which is how do we reform the rules profoundly? And reforming the rules, means a wide range of things. Changing the interpretative powers of the Commission, that can be done simply by communication. Changing the legislation, that's a long process, that's probably at least 2 years, that requires at least 2 years of negotiations. A third dimension is probably amending the TSCG, that is the intergovernmental treaty that has constitutionalized a number of these rules, and it's the constitutional treaty that actually introduces the debt reduction rule that forces member states to reduce debt by 1/20th per year. And then the fourth stage of that is an amendment of the treaty that changes maybe the corrective arm and that amends the reference to 3% and 60% that are in protocols attached to the treaty. So that's probably a 10-year long process to do all of that. But if we give ourselves the next 5 years, I think launching a 10-year process is entirely doable. The problem is that we don't have an intellectual consensus yet on what to do, and I don't think we can have an intellectual consensus in the next year. And so in the meantime, we have to find quick fixes. And so the question I have is, are the quick fixes the ones that Philippa and others have proposed, namely, pretending to keep the rules intact and digging trenches inside the rules, or trying to basically effectively suspend them for a bit longer because we're not satisfied with basically cheating the system as it is currently written. And a last word, also in response to Guntram, my view on the need for adjustment is slightly different from yours in the sense that I don't think what is creating the cliff and the need for adjustment will be the end of the RRF. What is more likely to create the cliff is a change in monetary policy. So long as monetary policy is expansionary, it doesn't really matter whether we have the RRF or not. In fact, what is granting the fiscal space today in individual member states is not the fact that we have the RRF, it's the fact that we have the ECB that is essentially buying a large portion of the debt that we issue. So to me, that's the real cliff edge to worry about, not so much the end of the RRF. That's it for me.
Thanks a lot, Shahin. I would probably ask immediately Philippa, because she has raised her hand already, and Guntram next.
Just a quick response, because actually this is pretty important to me. Shahin, you mentioned that what we're doing is when we look at potential output calculations, we're applying tricks. Actually, I think calculating potential output of the economy as pretty much an average of the past is not really being very serious about potential output of the economy. You know, we talk about female labor force participation. We just say, well, you know, if in the past women have worked much less than men, then that's just how it is. I'm not really sure we're serious about this, and saying, well, look at Scandinavia, what they are doing. That should be possible for us as well, and we do some reforms to get there. I think is a pretty, very valid question whether one can calculate potential output and whether one should have fiscal rules that are based on this. But if you have the framework, I think actually pretty plausible way of doing this, and maybe more plausible than just looking at some fudged average from the past, which you then apply some statistical filters to give plausibility. So whatever we think policy-wise, I think on the methodology, that would just be pretty important to me, that what we're actually trying to do is make this interesting framework that uses variables that aren't made for that slightly more plausible, rather than just applying some statistical filter tricks. That's exactly not what we're doing.
I think maybe what Shahin was saying is also that it's maybe not a trick, but it's just playing with the current rules. And maybe we should discuss more fundamentally about the sense of having a debt break with 0.35 maximum debt. But we may come back to that. Guntram.
No, thanks. Just a few remarks. I think the first remark is that I do think we need a change in the rule to incentivize in the European rules, to incentivize and exempt the investment, and ideally the green investment, from the consolidation pressure, because the political system, I just do not have enough trust in the political system to be able to do the right thing here, unless we incentivize the political system properly. And that's, I've been thinking about this sentence quite a bit when we wrote this in the text, and it's actually it's a sad sentence to write. It basically says our political system is not capable of prioritizing the future, and therefore I think it needs this kind of incentive. So I think this is the first point. So we do need a change in the rules, and in this paper to the ECOFIN, we've been basically saying we need some sort of a green golden rule. And this paper was deliberately not about the German debt break, and I'm happy to discuss that in more detail. But I think at the European level, I don't think we need some change to be able to do this. So that's the first point. Now the second point, Shahin, where I guess I disagree with you, at least on the European level, is on the question of extending the suspension of the exemption clause. Continuing the exemption clause, meaning suspending the rules for longer. And I guess there's two reasons really why I disagree. The first is that the recovery is really underway, and we have basically more or less closed the output gap by next year. And the second is basically your last point. Your last point was to say, oh, well, the real cliff edge comes from monetary policy. And once monetary policy stops funding everybody, then all of a sudden debt sustainability becomes a concern again, and some countries will not be able to fund themselves in the markets. Well, if that's the situation, then we can't pretend that everybody is just sustainable. Let's be realistic here. If a country has whatever 10% deficits and 200% or 160 or 180% debt to GDP ratio, you know, you have to start sending signals that you're serious about budget consolidations at some stage. And I know that this is a very complicated and difficult debate. And of course, you know, at what stage sustainability is an issue or not, you know, it's beauty in the eye of the beholder. But I think basically saying, let's just suspend forever the rules or for a very long period of time, and then force fiscal dominance on the monetary authorities, basically so that monetary policies do not have a choice to exit, I think is a choice that it's a political choice that one can take, of course, but it's a political choice that neither the treaties nor the founding fathers nor the public in Europe is ready to take. And so so that is an opinion that is very much supported by some in the left. I know that. So instead of consolidating, let's just inflate ourselves out of the debt. But it's certainly not what citizens in many countries, including the country where you were currently, but I mean in many other countries as well, want. They really would hate to see inflation rates to go up on a sustained level. So I mean, I think we need to start getting serious on the budget consolidation phase. It's very painful in some countries. It will be painful in France, as we know. I mean, France has pretty high structural deficits at this stage. And at the moment, it does not want to start anything that looks like consolidation because of political reasons, as we probably all would agree on. But you know, also in France, there is an issue at what stage this has to start. And in that sense, I'm very skeptical on this general direction. Let's just suspend. I mean, I do see the point that, you know, we need time for reform, and you know, if that was more your argument, sort of let's buy some time to you know, get the reform right, the reform process and all of that. I mean, then I think we are having a different conversation. But I'm quite worried about sort of consolidating, postponing consolidation forever, and then essentially ending up in monetary fiscal dominance. Because then I'm convinced citizens will just sort of really be angry about this European Union.
Which gets us back to the very economic question of what is the goal and about self-defeating austerity or what else. I mean, if you, it's not a goal in itself to have consolidation. It's save whatever from negative impact, economic impact, and then the big question still is there an ideal way to get out? So.
No, but I mean, just on this, I mean, I'm not saying you need massive, rapid fiscal consolidation. I mean, which obviously is self-defeating. I think this would be a mistake. I mean, that's for sure. You have to do it gradually in a slow way, and you need to avoid the cliff edges. But you also cannot pretend that you can just keep the structural deficit at 5% in a period in which you know, full employment is back and inflation is picking up. I mean, I think at some stage you have to start doing something else.
Nicola, and then Shahin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to respond a bit to Shahin's interesting comments. First of all, I wanted to refute the remark that I said you cannot change the rules. I don't think I said that. I think that every political system is probably capable of changing rules when rules need to be changed. But I also wanted to go a bit beyond fiscal rules when thinking about the right fiscal institutions to make sure that we invest in what we need to invest, and in making sure also to maintain fiscal sustainability. Because I think we don't have a shortage of rules, certainly not at the European level, but I think we did have a shortage of buy-in, so it didn't prevent what it's supposed or was supposed to prevent in the first hand, debt slippage. And I think you could argue this is because, in some countries at least, because there wasn't sufficient buy-in. So I think we do have to think about the rules their complexity, but also how much can be decided at the national level and should be overseen at the national level, and how much do we need to do at the European level, and perhaps look at the rules, the system from there, but also look at how the rules or whatever are kept. But I think, so I said I want to go beyond rules, and I think one issue here, we also talked about the fact that that consolidation often hits investment, much needed investment, and that's the case in Germany, right? In the past, so there's a lot of buy-in to the rules. I would say this is why people think it's difficult to change them. And here I think it's, rather than think a golden rule will not do the trick, because much of this happened under golden rule, right? I think what perhaps is needed more are independent fiscal institutions that really make transparent what fiscal plans are doing. So what do they mean for debt sustainability? What do they mean for climate sustainability or growth? And what do they need for equity? And some countries are doing this, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and I think on that basis, you can have an informed public discussion of what people want, what the electorate will buy into, and what the parliament will buy into. And I think perhaps we need more of this in addition or in complement to any rules that can, of course, be changed.
Okay, so Shahin, I think there's some 2 or 3 points you should comment.
Yes, so very quickly, I don't know if I used the word tricks or not, but if I did, it was inappropriate. So I don't mean to say that off-balance sheet vehicles and SPVs, or that recalculating the output gap are tricks. And I completely agree with what Philippa has said about the intellectual validity of just questioning how the rules are applied and on what numbers they are based, and the fact that the output gap calculations that we have been using for a decade were probably entirely inappropriate. So just to be clear, I'm not trying to debase the value and the usefulness of this work, or to delegitimize it and consider it as something that is trying to trick the system. That being said, I think that work, no matter how useful it is, I think is trying to avoid a political conversation that I think is equally, if not more important. But I completely agree that once we have these rules in place, questioning them and questioning the numbers underpinning them is fundamental. In particular, when you have a political system that has made the fairly odd choice, if you ask me, of introducing a Cobb-Douglas function inside its constitution. I think questioning that is very valid. So that was for in response to what Philippa said and to this work. In response to what Guntram says about the need for fiscal consolidation and the dangers of fiscal dominance. Yes, I mean, probably there is a need for fiscal consolidation at some point, and I think he's right to worry about this. Whether we need it now is something that I would question, and I don't see any signs at the moment of real risks of fiscal dominance. In fact, the reality is that over the last 10 years, we have consistently missed our inflation target. And so, yes, achieving at least the 2% we should be achieving, and probably more in order to catch up with the fact that we have been missing this target for the last 10 years, is something that I think is a desirable policy outcome. And we should not be worried that this policy outcome would threaten the balance between fiscal and monetary policy. And also finally on this, which I think is a very fundamental question, we can also question the current balance of independence. I mean, the current balance of independence of the central bank is really a byproduct of the intellectual consensus of the 1990s. And I think there are valid questions about this. You know, shouldn't we be thinking about a framework in which fiscal and monetary policy cooperate more than they have been over the last 20 years? And I think that's a very valid question. I don't think it's useful to suggest that, you know, European citizens would be worried or would dislike that. In fact, I even have the impression that the ECB itself is calling for it. The ECB keeps on calling for a more active fiscal policy because it requires a more active fiscal policy in order to meet its target. And so that probably means that a new framework of cooperation between the fiscal authority and the central bank is required.
Thanks, Shahin. Philippa, you want to react?
Yeah, just briefly on the point of on inflation and fiscal policy or running deficits. I mean, I really don't think in Europe we are at the point at the moment where we have demand and full employment driven inflation. I mean, we have 7% unemployment, 60% youth unemployment, in some countries much higher than in others. What I do worry about though, and this is actually a little bit of a worry when you have certain investment rules or vehicles that allow you to do certain type of spending at certain points in time and put a lot of pressure in a certain sector investment, is that we will get sector-specific demand side, demand-driven price shifts, increases, especially when we push the climate agenda out to the latter part of the 2020 years. So to be more specific, in Germany, if you don't do anything until 2025, because we have to consolidate, especially at the local level, and then from 2025 to 2030, we're trying to renovate all our buildings, high speed, and we're trying to build railways very, very quickly. I think we will see huge price increases with handymen, with builders and all of that. So actually, I think what we need to try and do is create a steady, predictable demand, and also try and not have it too focused or too much pressure constructed by a fiscal framework that only allows you to do certain expenditures or at a certain point of time. So you get higher price increases than we will have anyway if we do this, if we do decarbonization. We've got to try and smooth this part out, and this is how I could see actual decarbonization to become a lot more expensive than is actually necessary, is if we move this stuff out now. Just really quick comment on Nicola and fiscal institutions. I have a lot of sympathy for that approach, but I think we just what we need to do for them to be useful is, because in the end they're technical institutions, we need to define the terms, right? I mean, what is fiscal sustainability? What should they be looking at? And this is when we have this discussion of standards versus rules. Sometimes everybody can agree on, let's just have standards, that's better than rules. But then the standards, again, need to be something. You need to fill them with content, and that actually then requires kind of getting back to the debate of what does good fiscal policy actually look like. And there, from what I gather right now, we still have quite a lot of debating to do.
Thanks. Guntram, next.
I mean, just 2-3 quick points. I mean, I don't think I said that there is fiscal dominance. What I said is, in reaction to your point, Shahin, that the cliff edge will come from monetary policy withdrawal. Then, if that's the cliff edge, then there is an issue we need to worry about now in those countries that will, see funding problems. Now, I also didn't say, I mean, just to be clear on that one, that we immediately need to do massive fiscal consolidations. I mean, so I don't think that's at all the spirit of what I'm saying. All I'm saying is you have to be very mindful of this mix. And politically, I would stick with the statement that, high inflation rates, if there were to be fiscal dominance in the future, would be very toxic in this monetary union. Now, I didn't say that we have high inflation rates. I mean, we have currently a slight increase, temporary increase. One can debate to what extent the current inflation numbers are temporary or not. I think a significant part of that is a result of temporary side effects. I mean, temporary measures such as the VAT in Germany and all of that. So there's lots of temporary issues here. You know, inflation rate is likely to go back next year quite a bit. But you know, if there is a risk of future funding crisis because monetary policy withdraws, you know, we have an issue here, and you know, we can't dodge this issue. We have to be upfront about it, and so that was the spirit of my intervention on that point. Perhaps on Philippa and the German debt brake, I can't resist saying a few words. I mean, indeed, it's one of the strangest rules that has the not just the Cobb-Douglas, but I think also the Hodrick-Prescott filter is also in the German sort of bylaw of the German constitutional debt breaks. So quite a bit of technical stuff for a legal document. I mean, it seems to me that you know, on that reform debate, and there I would also probably disagree a bit with Shahin's spirit. I mean, I do think yes, the German debt brake has been reformed a few times, but yes, these kind of reforms have been rather marginal. I mean, they have been not changing fundamentally the spirit of the debt brake. I mean, they have, and that's not to say that these reforms haven't been useful, but the basic idea that is very much defended by the Christian Democrats of a black zero. I mean, that was explicitly the black zero even goes beyond the debt brake, as we know, but at least let's say the zero. That spirit has not been fundamentally altered, and so of course I think you're right. We can say there can be a political debate, and there should be a political debate on, you know, what to do with the German debt brake. But I think Philippa, I think, has a correct political assessment that you know, we won't get a fundamental reform, not with this parliament the way we have it, and not with this Bundesrat, the second chamber. We might get some marginal stuff, but you know, we will not get a fundamental shift in the orientation of the debt brake. That's just not the political majority at the moment in either house. I mean, and so in that sense, I'm quite sympathetic, I have to say, Philippa, to you know, looking in detail into the mismeasurement issues and all of that, because you know, there's this stuff which is relevant, and you know, we have to create the space the way we can create it at this stage, given the political constraints. But I totally agree. It's useful to debate the overall framework. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, a big change is going to happen now.
I think I understand Shahin's point like this also, that right, saying if you don't start intellectually to challenge it and to develop something new, you don't have a chance at all to get it done at some point. I would have one very quick question, just maybe a sentence from Janek, because there was the 28% mean part of public investment compared to other investment. In the course of your work on estimating the overall climate investment, in your estimation, is there any insight on that? What is the part of public and private investment that is needed to attain climate zero carbon 2045?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Guntram mentioned is that a lot of studies that looked at these ratios, they come up with percentages between 20 and 30%. And in our analysis, we looked at it bottom up. We didn't start with total investments, but we looked at the different public investments and added them up. And then in terms of GDP, we land at 1.3%, which is a bit higher than the estimates of Guntram. And I think one reason is that we also include, for example, investments for human resources, for climate neutral social housing, and other parts that in these assessments, for example, of the European Commission are not included. And so our percentage is a bit higher, but yeah, I guess in the end that fundamentally depends also the ratio. There's also that something that Guntram mentioned on the development of CO2 pricing. That's one thing. On the scope of regulations, will there be for example, like will be gas boilers or oil boilers be abandoned at one point? And that in the end determines the amount of public investments, I think fundamentally, especially the part of public funding for private investments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very important to understand. There are some questions. We won't be able to bring them all in, but we promise that we will keep them in mind and ask the panelists to answer them anyway. Julia, there's one question.
Exactly. There are a few interesting questions from the chat. Also to the panelists, maybe feel free to address them also bilaterally in the chat or in the Q&A function, because we won't have time to address them all. I would like to read out that from Tom Nuttall that says he'd like to hear about the interaction between the German and the European debate along two dimensions. The first one being whether the next German government would be open to amend the Stability and Growth Pact along the lines of golden rules, by, for instance, bringing in green investments. And the second one, if Germany does find ways to boost its own public investment through the vehicles that were already mentioned, to what extent would that shift in the German center of gravity affect the European one in the coming Stability and Growth Pact review? Who would like to answer?
Maybe I can start.
Yes.
No, I think, my insistence on having a German debate on these issues that is as open as possible is precisely because I think the German debate actually will largely frame the European debate. In the same way, in fact, that the introduction of the debt brake in 2009 in Germany eventually led to the TSCG in 2011 in the rest of Europe. And so I think these debates are inextricably linked, and that's in large part why I'm always pushing on the side of an ambitious intellectual conversation in Germany, because I think it's the precondition to have an open conversation in Europe. And I worry slightly that the election campaign hasn't been the occasion of a broad debate in Germany on these issues. I worry even more that the coalition negotiations would be concluded in a sort of ambiguously constructive statement that doesn't say very much about the German debt brake and its evolution and how much space we want to create in fiscal policy in Germany. And that as a result of that, we would have therefore limited impetus for a real conversation in Europe. And as you know, the Commission had initially committed to come up with a legislative proposal on these issues by the end of the year. It recently said that actually wouldn't do it and would wait until there is a greater consensus in Europe before it does put something on the table. And so my worry is that there is a sort of chain reaction between what's happening in Berlin on these issues and what could happen in Brussels and in the rest of Europe. And I conclude again to say, by re-insisting on this point about the relationship between these sort of broad long-term discussions, for which I'm not too concerned that we don't have an intellectual consensus in Germany, and not too concerned that we don't have an intellectual consensus in Europe, because I appreciate that these things take time. But I'm more worried about the fact that in the absence of an intellectual consensus, the temptation to reintroduce the rules as they are is creating, in my view, the risk of an inadequate fiscal policy in 2023.
Thank you, Shahin. I would like to, we have 10 minutes left, so I would like to come back to at least touch a little bit on the very current issue, which we touched already now. Maybe Philippa, not as SPD member, but maybe a very close observer of what's happening in Berlin actually at the moment. What could be an outcome of what is discussed at the moment, especially between Greens and the Liberal Party in fiscal policy terms? Is there something, I mean, if you look at the general positions, they seem to be quite far away from each other, but what would you expect are common outcomes that are probable?
Actually, I think they've kind of reduced the distance between them each other quite a lot recently. It was quite remarkable how Christian Lindner, the head of the Liberal Party, has distanced himself from the black zero. So running a balanced budget, exactly what the Conservatives have campaigned on, and he's distanced himself, saying that the black zero is ideological, very explicitly. And he said that literally in multiple interviews in German and in English, so to make sure that everybody gets that message. So firmly committed to the debt brake, but not to the black zero. And then I think under the debt brake also, I think there's kind of a bit of a broader consensus that it's okay to do stuff under the debt brake and it's okay to run a bit of a deficit. I haven't heard them say anything about fast consolidation or put that on center stage in recent weeks. So I do actually think that the Liberals are a bit more flexible on this. The Greens, I think what they really want is green investment. That's important to them. The way in which it exactly happens, I'm not sure that they're obsessed with the golden rule and that's the only way it can happen. I think as long as it does happen, that is where they are flexible. You know, for the Liberal Party, investments is important as well, and especially if it's investment that supports, you know, or that triggers private sector investment. I think it's perfectly compatible with their story. So yes, there is some distance to bridge, but actually I don't think it's that large. And then it's just basically where you come down, and you know, how much money do you get for instance, you know, faster depreciation for companies, and how much do you get for public green investment. I think that's more going to be the discussion than on really like fundamental terms and barriers.
If I understood correctly, I mean, the FDP, Christian Lindner, has very much focused on accelerated depreciation as a mean to help firms or to accelerate investment more than cutting taxes, corporate taxes. So that may also be something which is not so far away from what SPD or Greens already had in their minds. Maybe Guntram, would you then have a last round, give us a view on that, maybe also what concerns the next German finance minister from a especially Brussels point of view. And then if you have a last word now, and maybe quickly everyone a minute, there's one interesting question which goes much deeper into the fundamental issues on climate change and so on, but which I think is interesting to discuss anyway, is Katie's asking, how can the discussion on maybe the end of growth or degrowth or post-growth or whatever, in a way which we don't discuss now, but in a way, how can fiscal rules cope with the situation if ever it comes true that the economy won't be able to grow more for ecological or other reasons? Is there something in there what rules already can take into account, or how to live with that, or is that something intellectually which we still need to develop? Guntram.
I mean, on this last question, I mean, that's opening up a really, really big issue and an important issue. And I have just published a working paper exactly on that question. So I could lecture you now for half an hour on that. But I mean, in a nutshell, I think the one point I want to make is that, I don't think our societies will choose degrowth and stop growing. And I don't think the rest of the world will take that choice. So we will have growth and we will pursue policies that are growth friendly. So the key challenge will be, and that's why this climate debate is so important, the key challenge will be to accelerate decarbonization massively. And we have calculated that you need to accelerate decarbonization by a factor of 5, meaning currently you produce 1 unit of GDP less per unit of GDP per year. So the rate is 1.6%. It falls by 1.6%. It needs to fall by 9%. So this is massive. And that's why, this investment part is extremely important, but also the technological part is extremely important, investment into technology. And there, I think it goes well beyond the public sector. And that's why I have a certain sympathy for what Christian Lindner says on the depreciation. Can we allow and make the investment friendliness for the corporate sector higher? And that's not a general tax cut for the corporate sector, but sort of depreciation of investments, innovation. Can we treat those better? I think that would really accelerate and support the technological transformation, because without a massive technological transformation and without a massive investment push, we will never achieve these climate goals. So I think that's the sad reality, and we have to really push on those very hard. And then I think on the rest, I would say, well, I let others answer the other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we should stop straight on at 5 o'clock, because there's the other final session of this week. So maybe Janek, one word, maybe on the last issue.
And maybe just to add one thing to what Guntram said, it's not only all about capital expenditures, but quite a bit on operational expenditures as well, especially in the context of the industrial transformation, usage of hydrogen, the whole discussion about carbon contracts for difference. And that really challenges the definition of what is a investment, how we define investments, and for what the federal government can spend money and give fiscal transfers. So I think that should be something that should be taken into consideration when reforming the fiscal rules now.
Okay. Nicola, one sentence.
I want to echo what Janek said, because that's also true, by the way, for the digital transformation. So a lot of things will not be investments in the old way, like in machines, etc. But there can be services, cloud computing services, etc., that can really foster a technological transition. So if you want to focus on incentives to make the right investments, you have to think very hard how to do them. That's true for climate investments, but also for digital investments.
Thank you. Shahin.
I think just one word, and maybe Janek will not contradict me, but my impression is that the intellectual work to measure the exact size of the green investment needs, this intellectual work is in its really early stages. And my hunch is that we will find over time that we actually need a lot more money than we currently think. And so I think that's a good enough justification to think a lot more creatively and openly about the rules that are framing our fiscal policy today, because we're probably bound to have more surprises about the investment needs we have going forward.
Thank you very much. Philippa, one last word.
Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical about creating these categories of what's good and bad spending, depending on what it goes to in isolation, because a good investment essentially is defined by the context as well. I mean, you may educate someone force something where there isn't a job doesn't make sense, but you can only tell by the environment. So I think if we want to have, you know, a fiscal framework as standards for what good fiscal policy is and green fiscal policy is, we need to be a lot more goal oriented rather than focusing on the inputs, you know, is this investment or not, and what does it count as? So, I mean, basically we need to try and decarbonize, and then sometimes also leave it to, you know, whoever is the best actor to decide on what they're going to spend the money. And you make it difficult, you make it bureaucratic by putting it in these categories, because you end up spending your time on making the accounting work rather than actually thinking about what you should be doing. So I think that could be one of the interesting things to think about. How can we make it more goal oriented in a way?
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for this really interesting discussion. And I mean, we're just in the midst of this coalition talks, or not yet coalition talks, just first talks about the next government, and we will see that very much clearer. But I think the questions we raised are probably the ones that will also come up in the discussions in the next few days and weeks in Germany, and then we will see clearer. But the main challenges are set, I think, and we very much pointed them out. Thanks a lot to all of you. Thanks to Frank from the New Economics Foundation, and Dominic, who organized together with our team, Form New Economy team, this session. That was an excellent idea, something which is very inspiring and that we should continue at some point. So thanks again to Julia, Shahin, Janek, Nicola, and Guntram, who has already left us. And see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.